Summary of A Court of Thorns and Roses written by Sarah J. Maas. Chapter 1. The winter's unforgiving grip tightened as the skilled hunter moved through the thicket, perched high in a tree, eyes scanning the snow-laden landscape. An hour of vigilant observation had yielded nothing, the gusting wind erasing any trace of potential quarry. Hunger, a relentless companion, had led her farther from home than she dared in normal circumstances, but winter's harshness demanded risky ventures. The elusive animals had retreated deeper into the woods, leaving her to pick off stragglers one by one, praying they would last until the thaw. Numb fingers brushed away snowflakes, and the wind howled, carrying away any hope of an easy hunt. Winter was the hard time, and desperation had driven her to these uncharted territories. The landscape seemed to mock her, burying tracks and signs of life beneath the thickening snow. From her vantage point in the crook of a tree branch, the forest below appeared barren, its secrets buried along with the traces of potential game. Hunger, a cruel motivator, had pushed her to the limits, and now, perched on the edge of survival, she wiped her numb fingers over her eyes, the flakes clinging to her lashes. No telltale signs of deer passing through were visible. The animals remained deep in the woods, gnawing at bark that would sustain them until the bark ran out. She sighed, the visibility reduced by the thick snowfall, her position in the tree rendered useless. Here in the heart of winter, the deer had not yet moved on. They would stay until the bark was depleted, and then, perhaps, journey north into the fairy lands of Prythian. The very thought sent a shudder down her spine, and she pushed it away, focusing on the immediate task at hand. Survival. With the snowfall, her chances of spotting anything from the elevated tree position dwindled. The wind, carrying thick flurries, further obscured her vision. Stifling a groan, her stiff limbs protested as she unstrung her bow and eased off the tree. The icy snow crunched under her fraying boots as she descended. Visibility was low, and unnecessary noise could cost her the hunt. She was well on her way to yet another fruitless endeavor. Only a few hours of daylight remained, and if she didn't leave soon, navigating the forest in the dark would be perilous. The warnings of the town hunters echoed in her mind. Giant wolves were on the prowl, and in numbers. Strange folk, tall and eerie, had been spotted in the area. The forest was fraught with dangers, and the fairy lands of Prythian lurked beyond, a place where mortals dared not tread unless they had a death wish. A persistent hunger drove her farther into the woods, beyond the safety of her familiar territories. The animals had pulled in, and the pickings were slim. She couldn't afford to return empty-handed. The village elders had dismissed the tales of distant border towns left in splinters and ashes as hearsay, but recent whispers turned those tales into a chilling reality. She crouched in a cluster of snow-heavy brambles, surveying a clearing through the thorns. A small brook flowed through it, and a few holes in the ice suggested it was still frequented by wildlife. She hoped for something, anything, to come by. The snow continued to fall, dancing and curling like sparkling spindrifts. A sense of urgency filled her as she pressed a hand against her hollow and aching stomach. The situation was dire. Their last loaf of bread had been consumed yesterday, and the dried meat had run out the day before. Another night with a hungry belly awaited her, but the alternative, facing the appetite of a wolf or a fairy, was a risk too great. She settled into a more comfortable position, stifling a groan as she calmed her breathing. Survival had been her focus for years, and now, with the snow veiling the woods, spotting prey became an even greater challenge. She strained to listen to the forest over the wind, a relentless, vicious part of her mind temporarily silenced by the snow-veiled beauty surrounding her. There was a time when she savored the contrast of new grass against dark, tilled soil, or admired an amethyst brooch nestled in folds of emerald silk. Dreams of a future where her sisters were married, and she had the time and resources to indulge in painting, flickered in her mind. But those dreams were a distant memory. The howling wind transformed into a soft sighing, and the snow fell lazily in big, fat clumps. The white landscape, fresh and clean against the brown and gray world, captivated her despite the circumstances. She hadn't bothered to notice anything lovely or interesting for a long time. The bushes across the clearing rustled, breaking the trance. Instinctively, she drew her bow, peering through the thorns. Less than 30 paces away, a small doe stood, not yet too scrawny from winter, but desperate enough to strip bark from a tree. Her mouth watered at the thought of the bounty that could sustain her family for a week or more. She took aim, the anticipation building, fingers trembling. A quiet predator, she blended into the snowy surroundings, hoping to remain unnoticed. Yet, a pair of golden eyes gleamed from the adjacent brush, shattering the silence. The forest held its breath. The enormous wolf, the size of a pony, moved with unnatural stealth, inching closer toward the oblivious doe. Fear gripped her, and her mind raced through the possibilities. If he was no ordinary animal, if he was of Prithian origin, a fairy in disguise, being eaten was the least of her concerns. The warnings of the town hunters echoed in her mind, urging her to flee if she ever encountered such creatures. She weighed her options, her hands shaking as she drew the longest and heaviest arrow from her quiver, a rare arrow crafted from mountain ash and armed with an iron head. Songs sung as lullabies spoke of fairies' aversion to iron, and the ash wood's ability to momentarily weaken their immortal, healing magic. The wolf crept closer, and a twig snapped beneath one of his paws. The doe, ears straining toward the gray sky, was still oblivious to the approaching danger. Her chest tightened, and a single question echoed in her mind, was the wolf alone? Gripping her bow, she drew the string farther back, her eyes locked on the massive creature. Her life had been reduced to a series of risks in the 8 years she'd been hunting, and now, with the fate of a deadly encounter hanging in the balance, she had only one ash arrow. The wolf shot from the brush in a flash of gray, white, and black, his yellow fangs gleaming. The doe, caught by surprise, had no chance. The ash arrow found its mark in the wolf's side, causing him to bark in pain. The crimson spray stained the snow as he released the doe's neck. His attention shifted toward the hunter, and she surged to her feet, another arrow drawn. The forest held its breath as the wolf, moss-stained with blood, regarded her with a single remaining golden eye. The snow resumed its fall, a silent witness to the standoff between mortal and beast. He didn't try to dodge the second arrow. Chapter 2. The sun had set by the time I exited the forest, my knees shaking. My hands, stiff from clenching the legs of the deer, had gone utterly numb miles ago. Not even the carcass could ward off the deepening chill. The world was awash in hues of dark blue, interrupted only by shafts of buttery light escaping from the shuttered windows of our dilapidated cottage. It was like striding through a living painting, a fleeting moment of stillness, the blues swiftly shifting to solid darkness. As I trudged up the path, each step fueled only by near-dizzying hunger, my sisters' voices fluttered out to meet me. I didn't need to discern their words to know they most likely were chattering about some young man or the ribbons they'd spotted in the village when they should have been chopping wood, but I smiled a bit nonetheless. I kicked my boots against the stone door frame, knocking the snow from them. Bits of ice came free from the gray stones of the cottage, revealing the faded ward markings etched around the threshold. My father had once convinced a passing charlatan to trade the engravings against fairy harm in exchange for one of his wood carvings. There was so little that my father was ever able to do for us that I hadn't possessed the heart to tell him the engravings were useless, and undoubtedly fake. Mortals didn't possess magic, didn't possess any of the superior strength and speed of the fairies or high fae. The man, claiming some high fae blood in his ancestry, had just carved the whorls and swirls and runes around the door and windows, muttered a few nonsense words, and ambled on his way. I yanked open the wooden door, the frozen iron handle biting my skin like an asp. Heat and light blinded me as I slipped inside. Fair. Ellen's soft gasp scraped past my ears, and I blinked back the brightness of the fire to find my second eldest sister before me. Though she was bundled in a threadbare blanket, her gold-brown hair, the hair all three of us had, was coiled perfectly about her head. 8 years of poverty hadn't stripped from her the desire to look lovely. Where did you get that? The undercurrent of hunger honed her words into a sharpness that had become too common in recent weeks. No mention of the blood on me. I'd long since given up hope of them actually noticing whether I came back from the woods every evening. At least until they got hungry again. But then again, my mother hadn't made them swear anything when they stood beside her deathbed. I took a calming breath as I slung the dough off my shoulders. She hit the wooden table with a thud, rattling a ceramic cup on its other end. "Where do you think I got it?" My voice had turned hoarse, each word burning as it came out. My father and Nesta still silently warmed their hands by the hearth, my eldest sister ignoring him, as usual. I peeled the wolf pelt from the dough's body, and after removing my boots and setting them by the door, I turned to Ellen. Her brown eyes, my father's eyes, remained pinned on the dough. "Will it take you long to clean it?" Me. Not her, not the others. I'd never once seen their hands sticky with blood and fur. I'd only learned to prepare and harvest my kills thanks to the instruction of others. Ellen pushed her hand against her belly, probably as empty and aching as my own. It wasn't that Ellen was cruel. She wasn't like Nesta, who had been born with a sneer on her face. Ellen sometimes just didn't grasp things. It wasn't meanness that kept her from offering to help, it simply never occurred to her that she might be capable of getting her hands dirty. I'd never been able to decide whether she actually didn't understand that we were truly poor or if she just refused to accept it. It still hadn't stopped me from buying her seeds for the flower garden she tended in the milder months, whenever I could afford it. And it hadn't stopped her from buying me 3 small tins of paint, red, yellow, and blue, during that same summer I'd had enough to buy the ash arrow. It was the only gift she'd ever given me, and our house still bore the marks of it, even if the paint was now fading and chipped, little vines and flowers along the windows and thresholds and edges of things, tiny curls of flame on the stones bordering the hearth. Any spare minutes I'd had that bountiful summer I used to bedeck our house in color, sometimes hiding clever decorations inside drawers, behind the threadbare curtains, underneath the chairs and table. We hadn't had a summer that easy since. Fair. My father's deep rumble came from the fire. His dark beard was neatly trimmed, his face spotless, like my sister's. "What luck you had today, in bringing us such a feast." From beside my father, Nesta snorted. Not surprising. Any bit of praise for anyone, me, Ellen, other villagers, usually resulted in her dismissal. And any word from our father usually resulted in her ridicule as well. I straightened, almost too tired to stand, but braced a hand on the table beside the dough as I shot Nesta a glare. Of us, Nesta had taken the loss of our fortune the hardest. She had quietly resented my father from the moment we'd fled our manor. Even after that awful day one of the creditors had come to show just how displeased he was at the loss of his investment. But at least Nesta didn't fill our heads with useless talk of regaining our wealth, like my father. No, she just spent whatever money I didn't hide from her, and rarely bothered to acknowledge my father's limping presence at all. Some days, I couldn't tell which of us was the most wretched and bitter. "We can eat half the meat this week," I said, shifting my gaze to the dough. The deer took up the entirety of the rickety table that served as our dining area, workspace, and kitchen. "We can dry the other half," I went on, knowing that no matter how nicely I phrased it, I'd still do the bulk of it. "And I'll go to the market tomorrow, to see how much I can get for the hides," I finished, more to myself than to them. No one bothered to confirm they'd heard me, anyway. My father's ruined leg was stretched out before him, as close to the fire's heat as it could get. The cold, or the rain, or a change in temperature always aggravated the vicious, twisted wounds around his knee. His simply carved cane was propped up against his chair, a cane he'd made for himself, and that Nesta was sometimes prone to leaving far out of his reach. He could find work if he wasn't so ashamed, Nesta always said when I hissed about it. She hated him for the injury, too, for not fighting back when that creditor and his thugs had burst into the cottage and smashed his knee again and again. Nesta and Ellen had fled into the bedroom, bar Rick.